The Hazy or New England Style IPA. This is the beer style that has taken the world by storm over the last 5 years and quickly moved into the spotlight. What if I told you that you could make this at home in less than 10 days? What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Wolf King Brewing. I am Liam Wynn, your host, and today we are back with the third episode. I don't know why I feel the need to gesticulate my hands so much. We're back here with the third episode of the 10-Day Brews series. You may notice that I'm wearing the same clothes as in a previous episode. That should tell you something a little bit about my messed up recording schedule. Today I'm going to be formatting things a little bit differently than the past few episodes have been, where I've had part one be the brew day and then part two be the showcase of the finished beer. You may notice, and you may have noticed, that I am drinking the finished beer. It is actually here in front of me. But wait, Liam, you're supposed to brew it. Well, I already brewed it and I filmed all that, and I'll include some footage of it. Let me know if you guys like this format a little bit better, where I can just go through everything in one fell swoop, show you the brewing process, the fermentation, the dry hopping schedule, and boom, finished beer right in your face. You don't have to wait 10 days. But if I asked you to wait 10 days, would you do it for me? Without any further delays, I'm gonna hop right into the brewing of this beer, and with that, we'll start with the recipe. Now, I actually brew iterations of this beer relatively regularly because I love this recipe. I just usually rotate out the hops. So I went ahead and weighed and milled out 8.5 pounds of a premium 2-row brewer's malt. Any 2-row base malt or Pilsner malt is gonna work for this. I then added 1.5 pounds of wheat malt. I used Viking's wheat malt. I've also used Brews white wheat in the past. Both are great. And then 8 ounces of Carafoam. Now, the Carafoam addition may or may not be necessary, but I kind of do it habitually. I went ahead and topped all of that off with 2.5 pounds of flaked oats. Now, I use just these canisters of rolled oats from the grocery store. These are much cheaper than buying oats from homebrew stores in my experience. Those are functionally exactly the same as flaked oats. Rolled and flaked mean almost the same thing. Look it up. I don't have time to talk about that. Really, what we want to end up with is a beer with significant body and mouthfeel. It needs to be creamy in texture. It needs to be nice and smooth and round and very pleasant to drink. But really, you're getting a mouthful of beer. I mean, it's not a super crisp, easy drinker, and it shouldn't be. In my opinion, what more so defines the New England Style or Hazy IPA, more so than anything else, even the explosive hop aroma, is the thicker mouthfeel, the more full body of the beer. That really gives it the character that I'm looking for. Let's talk about the water. As you guys know, I always start with a base of reverse osmosis water, unless otherwise specified. I did a full volume mash, a brew in a bag mash at 6.75 or 6 3/4 gallons. Now, in terms of the water chemistry, I'm going to get into this very briefly, but it is very important with a style like this that you have a high chloride to sulfate ratio. The reason for this is because you want to round out the beer. When you have a high sulfate content in the beer, it can give you a crisp sharpness. That's important in like a West Coast IPA where you want it to be bitter and kind of sharp, or pale ales or anything like that. In this case, we want this beer to be extremely round. We want to have a high chloride content and make sure that this beer is not chalky. You know, if you have too much, it can get kind of a chalky mouthfeel, but we do want it to be nice and smooth and round. So I won't share my entire water profile, but I did end up with about 125 parts per million of chloride and then 70 parts per million of sulfate. So in terms of my additions, that's about a teaspoon and a half of calcium chloride dihydrate and a little over, probably an 8/10 of a teaspoon of gypsum into the mash. I went ahead and mashed this for 60 minutes at 152 degrees. I didn't worry too much about temperature here because whether this finishes at 1010 or 1012, in my experience, really that's not going to be the main contributing factor in the body or flavor of the beer. So 152 degrees or so for 60 minutes. After my mash was complete, I went ahead and checked my pre-boil gravity, which was 1059, and then I moved into the boil. Now, luckily for this style, I can do a short boil. You'll get different opinions if you ask different people about this, but I boil my Hazy IPAs for 30 minutes. I don't think I need a 60-minute boil, so long as it's rigorous enough. I do not get any DMS in these beers. In fact, I never have. And not only that, but it allows me to more finely tune the bitterness because you do not want this beer to be overly bitter. And I feel like I'm talking really fast. Maybe I'll try and slow it down a little bit. That's my bad. Sorry. We can't talk about the boil without talking about the hops. Now, that being said, there's going to be very little hops in the actual boil. For this New England Style IPA, really the majority of your hop aroma and flavor is going to come from late additions and dry hopping additions, which we'll talk about shortly. I did a very small bittering addition, a 1/4 ounce of Comet for my 30-minute boil, and even that was maybe a little bit excessive. Again, I did it habitually, but it's probably not even necessary. You can get all of your bitterness from this style from the Whirlpool additions because you don't want this to be super bitter anyways. I mean, low IBUs are going to help you get that juicy character that you want and focus on the other aspects of the hops rather than their bittering power. After the boil, I went ahead and cooled the wort down to about 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I began my whirlpool. Now, I'm using air quotes because by whirlpool, I mean I stirred the kettle. While stirring the kettle, I went ahead and added an ounce each of El Dorado and Amarillo hops and let those rest and kind of stirred the kettle periodically for about 15 minutes. After which I began to cool down the rest of the wort and took my final gravity reading, which put me right at 1072, which was almost exactly what I was shooting for, and that's a damn good feeling. One of the beautiful things about using Kvaik yeast is that I do not have to cool this wort down very far at all. In fact, I only cooled this down to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I rehydrated 1 pack of Lallemand Voss Kvaik, and I just pitched straight in. Just like that. No starter, just rehydrated 1 pack of dry yeast, threw it in there, and it ripped right through this wort. I did ferment this right about 95 degrees, so I did expect it to go very quickly, and any fruity esters that came with that were honestly welcomed in this beer. After finishing cleaning up and getting my dry hop additions ready, I went ahead and checked on my fermenting closet. And less than 6 hours after pitching that yeast, my airlock was going nuts. So, this thing kicked off really, really quickly with no starter, which is always great to see. Now, as you may expect for a beer like this, I had a pretty rigorous dry hopping schedule, but I only had 2 actual additions because I wanted to minimize oxygen intake in this beer. It's extremely important to make sure that as little oxygen as possible comes in contact with this beer post-fermentation, because this style oxidizes terribly quickly and it just kills your fresh hop aroma and flavor, and you get like a cardboardy sweetness. It's the only way I can explain it. I know that sounds weird, but it doesn't ruin the beer, but it really just takes most of the fun out of it. So the first dry hop addition, I didn't have to worry about that at all because I was dry hopping right at high Kreuzen, which in this case was literally 1 day after I brewed the beer. It was already a nice big rocky foam on top of the beer. The airlock was going absolutely bananas. So I went ahead and opened that up, and I pitched 1 ounce each of El Dorado and Amarillo, along with ½ an ounce of Comet. Another day and a half or so in the future, I noticed no airlock activity had been going on for quite a while. So I went ahead and took a sample and checked the gravity and found to be at my final gravity of 1012. Now keep in mind, this was after like 48 hours of fermentation. So 1072 down to 1012, 2 days. It's just that easy. At this point, I did taste the beer and it was tasting really good, but there's more dry hopping to be done. If you've watched my videos before, you know that I like to dry hop cold. So I went ahead and took the entire fermenter and I placed it in the fridge behind me to do a cold crash. Now, when you're cold crashing with New England Style IPA, you have to be careful of oxygen intake, because when you cool that liquid down, that fermenter is gonna suck in oxygen through your airlock, especially if you use the S-shaped airlocks like I use. That being said, I consulted brewlosophy.com to steal one of their methods that I know that they are very proud of, and that's this little thing. If you notice here, this is a balloon. This is a Mylar balloon. And just in general, I don't really condone the use of these because they're bad for the environment. Just use the normal balloons. But for this case, they work perfectly. So you may notice I have a hose going into the balloon, and those are kind of taped together to form a pseudo seal. I say pseudo because I don't know how sealed it really is. And then I kind of stuffed the hose into the inner diameter of my bung here for my fermenter. So if I asthma. If I blow on this, you notice the balloon starts to inflate. Now what I do, so that's gonna be super loud, get that out of here. So what I'm ultimately doing with that is I'm filling up that balloon with CO2. And then I am replacing that with the bung with the airlock in it. So now I have the bung with the balloon attached to the piece of hose on top of my fermenter. So instead of sucking in oxygen through the airlock, it's gonna suck in the CO2 that's in that balloon. So again, minimizing oxygen intake, so important with this style. Now, as I was cold crashing the beer, I went ahead and did my second dry hop addition, which was 2 ounces each of El Dorado and Amarillo, along with 1 ounce of Comet. Now, I did one more hop addition after this, but it was kind of a spur of the moment type thing. I'll talk about that in just a second. But as I was doing the second dry hop addition, I went ahead and made sure to purge my fermenter with CO2 as I was doing the addition. So basically I took the bung out of the top of the fermenter lid, I stuck a hose in there, just an open hose, and I turned my CO2 up to 2 or 3 PSI, and I just let that kind of fill the space as I was lifting up the lid and throwing my dry hops in. It's not a perfect system. Ideally, I'd be able to bubble in CO2 from the bottom to create a blanket on top of the liquid, but I do think it worked pretty well. Now, after those hops had been in there for 48 hours, I went ahead and kegged the bitch. I ended up with just over 4 gallons total volume, so I set the keg to 45 PSI and left that sucker for 13 hours and woke up to a very well carbonated beer. I pulled 3 samples over the next 2 days after the beer was carbonated just to make sure everything was going good. I did really like the flavor profile that was going on. I was getting all kinds of tropical fruit, so really pleasant drinking, and this, I mean, it really is juice, basically. I can't emphasize that enough. But as I was pulling these samples, I noticed that by the time I was taking the 3rd sample, it seemed to be deteriorating already. I seem to, and I'm the only one who noticed it. Okay, so everyone else who has tried this beer loves it. So this is just me being a brewer and us overthinking everything. But I noticed just a slight tinge of oxygenation, and I'm thinking, man, where is that coming from? I did really everything in my power. It all just came back to me. That is exactly what I had done wrong when taking samples. So to best explain this, I'm going to grab my little picnic tap here. This is the most common way in which I just pull quick samples from my kegs, especially when they're carbonating or shortly after being done carbonating. I just pop this onto the outpost, pour a little cup, and then I do a horrible thing, which I've never thought about until just now. I take the gas quick disconnect off, then I purge the keg of all the CO2 that's in it, and then I open up the picnic tap to make sure the liquid flows back into the keg because I don't want to waste that little bit in there. Here's the deal though, that sucks air in when I do that. So it's so obvious to me now. Unfortunately, hindsight is 2020. Luckily, I only picked up a little bit of oxygenation. I was very careful when canning this batch to not pick up any more, to purge everything with CO2 that came in contact with the beer. And I'm still really happy with how it came out. But it is a lesson learned. I will have to not do that anymore. It's for the 2 ounces of beer that are sitting in this line, probably even less than that, it certainly was not worth oxygenating an entire batch. So again, it's not ruined. I'm still super happy with it. I could chug this stuff, believe me. I won't because I'll throw up, but not because it tastes bad. I just can't chug beer. I'm incapable. But that's my problem, not the beer's problem. But after taking that third sample, I did one more thing to try and bring back some of the freshness, which is I added 2 ounces of Citra in a hop bag, sanitized hop bag. I just threw them straight in the keg and let them sit there for 24 hours. And that did bring back some of the hop character that I was looking for and that I think the oxygen kind of ate up. But I can't seem to get away from using Citra, man. I use it in everything. I mean, this beer originally did not have Citra, but it needed it. It's my favorite hop. I put it in every hop forward beer, it seems like. So maybe in the future I'll try to refrain from using it. And it really is super good. It's juicy. I'm going to be sharing this beer with some folks on the channel and giving, some kind of live feedback so you guys can see what the final product is like. But that's really it. I mean, if you guys have any questions, drop them in the comment section below. If you like the video, share it with somebody else who may like it. It really helps me out trying to get this channel going. But I hope you guys are enjoying the 10-day brew series so far. Let me know if you prefer this style of episode where everything's done before I start filming and I have everything laid out for you and you can watch it all in one shot. I know this episode will be a little bit longer than the previous ones, and it's more, or I should say less likely that someone will click on the longer video. But if you're still here, I do appreciate it. Let me know what you think. And I'm gonna drink the rest of this and be super happy about it. So again, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you later. Cheers.